I can't do this anymore. 30 pairs of eyes turned to watch my daughter stand up so fast her chair scraped against my hardwood floor like nails on a chalkboard. Mom, I tried to tell you. I tried so many times. Bridget, please, I heard myself say, my voice tight with embarrassment. This isn't the time, it's never the time. Her voice cracked, rising above the clinking of wine glasses and the murmur of confused guests. It's never the right moment to tell you that your perfect son, your golden boy, has been stealing from you for 7 years. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that dining room. I watched Trevor's face drain of color, then flush red. Amanda's mother stood, ice dripping from every word. We should leave. Amanda, gather your things, but it was the man standing at my kitchen entrance who spoke next. Chef Graham Price, holding a manila folder I hadn't noticed before. Trevor already has, he said quietly. I'm sorry, Mrs. Brennan. I found documents hidden in the back of your pantry. Behind the fancy cookbooks you never use. My hands shook as I opened that folder. Bank statements showing accounts I'd never opened. Investment documents bearing my signature that I'd never seen. Emails discussing the mother fund and maintaining her ignorance. The numbers swam before my eyes. Over 7 years, the total came to nearly $900,000. You've been stealing from me? My son, my Harvard Law graduate, my golden boy, looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Not love. Not remorse. Just cold calculation about whether he could still talk his way out of this. Welcome back to Revenge with Alice. If you're new here, I share real stories about betrayal, justice, and the strength it takes to choose truth over comfortable lies. And if you're part of our community already, thank you. Your support means everything to me. Before we get into today's story, I want to say a prayer for everyone watching. Wherever you are right now, whatever you're facing, I pray that you have the courage to see the truth in your own life. I pray for discernment to know who truly has your best interests at heart. I pray for strength when doing the right thing costs you everything you thought you wanted. And I pray that you find the kind of family, whether blood or chosen, that's built on honesty instead of illusion. Amen. Now, let me tell you about Janet Brennan, and the Thanksgiving dinner that destroyed everything she thought she knew about her children. My name is Janet Brennan, and I'm 58 years old. For 3 decades, I believed I had built the perfect family. A successful marriage that ended civilly, 2 accomplished children, and a reputation in our Boston suburb that made neighbors envious. My home was the kind of sprawling colonial in Brookline that appeared in the real estate section of magazines. White columns, black shutters, a kitchen that could have been featured in Architectural Digest, but last Thanksgiving, when I hired renowned chef Graham Price to cater our annual dinner for 30 guests, he discovered something in my kitchen that shattered every illusion I'd carefully constructed over the years. What he found wasn't just hidden ingredients or secret recipes. It was evidence of a betrayal so calculated, so methodical, that it had been happening under my roof for 7 years. And the person orchestrating it? Someone I would have died to protect. Let me take you back to the beginning, before that catastrophic dinner. Back when I still believed my family was exactly what it appeared to be, Trevor was my golden boy. 32 years old, a corporate attorney at one of Boston's most prestigious firms. Harvard Law graduate, partner track, engaged to Amanda Rothschild, and yes, that Rothschild family, the ones who owned half the commercial real estate in Massachusetts. Trevor had my late mother's sharp cheekbones and his father's commanding presence. He wore $1,000 suits like they were jeans. Every achievement of his felt like validation of my parenting. When Trevor walked into a room, people noticed. He had this magnetic quality, this way of making everyone feel like they were part of something important just by talking to him. At family gatherings, he'd hold court, telling stories about his cases, making even the most boring legal work sound thrilling. "Mom, you should have seen the judge's face," he'd say, leaning back in his chair with that confident smile. 3 hours of testimony, and I had the plaintiff's entire argument dismantled in 15 minutes, and I'd beam with pride, thinking, that's my son. That's the man I raised. Then there was Bridget, 28, my complicated daughter. Where Trevor was polished and corporate, Bridget was creative and unpredictable. She'd studied culinary arts in Paris, worked in Michelin-starred restaurants across Europe, and had recently returned to the States with dreams of opening her own establishment. She wore her dark hair in a perpetual messy bun, had a tattoo of a whisk on her wrist that I pretended not to see, and possessed a talent in the kitchen that bordered on supernatural. When Bridget cooked, it was like watching a conductor lead an orchestra. Every movement had purpose. Every ingredient was treated with reverence. She could taste a dish and tell you exactly what it needed: a pinch of salt, a splash of acid, 5 more seconds of heat. It was a gift I never fully appreciated. "Mom, try this," she'd say, holding out a spoon. "I've been working on the sauce for 3 hours," and I'd taste it, nod, say something like, "It's lovely, sweetheart," without really understanding what I was experiencing. I didn't have the vocabulary to appreciate what she'd created. More importantly, I didn't have the interest. Because in my mind, cooking wasn't a real career. It was a hobby. Something nice girls did before they found serious work. I'd wanted Bridget to follow Trevor into law or business, something with prestige and stability. Something I could brag about at book club meetings. Cooking felt like a step down, though I never said that directly. I didn't have to. She could see it in my face every time she talked about her restaurant dreams. My husband Richard and I had divorced 12 years ago. The split was civil, expensive, and left me with the sprawling colonial and enough settlement money to maintain my lifestyle. Richard had remarried within a year, a younger woman, naturally, and moved to California. We spoke twice a year, always about the children, never about us. The conversations were painfully polite. "How's Trevor doing?" "Excellent. He just made partner track." "And Bridget?" "Still finding herself." Richard would sigh. I'd change the subject. We'd hang up and not speak for another 6 months. After the divorce, I'd rebuilt my life around being the perfect mother, the impeccable hostess, the woman who had it all together despite her failed marriage. My Thanksgiving dinners were legendary in our social circle. Every year, I invited 30 people: family, Trevor's colleagues, Amanda's parents, members of my book club, and various connected individuals who kept me relevant in Boston's upper-middle-class society. These weren't just dinners. They were productions. Every detail mattered. The table settings, the wine pairings, the conversation topics. I'd spend weeks planning, days preparing. By the time guests arrived, everything would be perfect. Or at least it would appear that way. This year, I decided to elevate things. Instead of cooking myself, exhausting myself for days, I would hire a professional chef. Not just any chef, but Graham Price, whose restaurant Ember had just received its 2nd Michelin star. Graham was 45, with silver streaking through his dark hair and hands that moved with the precision of a surgeon. His waiting list for private events was 6 months long, but I'd pulled strings through Amanda's father, who'd invested in one of Graham's ventures. I announced my plans to Bridget over coffee in my kitchen 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. She sat across from me at the Marble Island, her hands wrapped around her mug, wearing one of those oversized sweaters she favored. "Mom, you don't need to hire someone," she said, her voice careful. "I can help you cook." "It would be fun." I patted her hand, the way you'd reassure a child. "Sweetheart, you're always so busy with your restaurant plans. Besides, Graham Price is an investment. Having him cater will be the talk of the season." Something flickered across Bridget's face: hurt, maybe, or anger, but it vanished so quickly I convinced myself I'd imagined it. She'd always been sensitive about her career, particularly because I'd initially opposed her culinary path. "This was just more of the same oversensitivity. If you insist," Bridget said quietly. "But I should warn you." "Warn me about what?" She hesitated, her eyes searching mine for something I couldn't identify. "Nothing. Never mind. I'm sure it'll be wonderful." I should have pressed. I should have asked what she wanted to tell me. But I was already mentally planning the seating chart, already composing the casual mentions I'd make at book club about hiring Graham Price. That was my fatal flaw. I was always 3 steps ahead in my own performance, never present enough to notice what was happening right in front of me. The day before Thanksgiving, Graham arrived at 10 in the morning with 2 assistants and enough equipment to stock a professional kitchen. I'd cleared up my pantry and refrigerator as instructed, giving him complete control. He moved through my space with confident efficiency, marking stations, organizing tools, transforming my domestic kitchen into something that resembled a surgical theater. Mrs. Brennan, he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive. I've reviewed your menu preferences. We'll be preparing a heritage turkey with 3 different preparations, 7 sides including my signature truffle potato tort, and a dessert course that I promise will be memorable. I'm in your capable hands, I replied, already rehearsing how I'd describe this moment to my friends. His assistants unpacked boxes of ingredients I'd never heard of. Specialty salts from different regions. Oils infused with things I couldn't pronounce. Vegetables that looked like they belonged in an art installation rather than on a plate. I watched them work for a while, feeling simultaneously impressed and completely out of my depth. This was Bridget's world, I realized. This language of cuisine, this precision and passion. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, regret, maybe, but I pushed it away. What I didn't notice then, what I was too self-absorbed to see, was the way Graham's expression changed when Bridget walked into the kitchen an hour later. Did she come by to drop off the floral arrangements I'd ordered? She pushed through the side door carrying 3 massive vases, her cheeks flushed from the November cold. But when she saw Graham, she froze in the doorway, the vases nearly slipped from her hands. Bridget? Graham's voice held something I couldn't quite identify. Surprise? Recognition? Pain? What are you doing here? You two know each other. I asked, looking between them. We work together, Bridget said flatly, her voice stripped of all emotion. Years ago. Paris. The Institut Culinaire, Graham added, and there was warmth in his voice now, mixed with something complicated. You are one of my best students. The temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. They stared at each other with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, something unspoken passing between them that I couldn't decipher. It felt private, intimate, like I was intruding on a moment I had no right to witness. Small world, I said, forcing brightness into my voice. Well, I'll let you professionals work. Bridget, darling, the flowers are lovely. She set down the arrangements without looking at me, her eyes still locked on Graham's face. Her hands were shaking slightly. Mom, can I talk to you? She asked, her voice urgent. Privately? I'm rather busy, sweetheart. Can it wait? It's important. I glanced at my watch. I had a hair appointment in 40 minutes. The caterer for the drinks was arriving at 2. I still needed to review the seating chart one more time. After the dinner, I promised. We'll have all the time in the world then. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Graham worked through the afternoon and into the evening, his assistants moving like shadows around him. I stayed mostly out of the way, occasionally checking in, making sure he had everything he needed. The house filled with smells that made my mouth water, roasting bones for stock, herbs being crushed, butter browning in copper pans. Around 8 o'clock, after his assistants had left for the day, I came downstairs for water and heard Graham's voice through the kitchen door. He was on the phone, his tone low and tense. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping. But I stopped in the hallway, my hand on the doorknob, listening. Yes, it's definitely her mother's house, he was saying. No, she doesn't know. Should I tell her? A pause. I could hear the murmur of someone responding on the other end. You're right. Not my place. But this feels wrong. Another pause, longer this time. I understand. Professional boundaries. But if she asks me directly, I pushed open the door. Graham turned, pocketing his phone quickly, his expression shifting to neutral professionalism so fast it was almost convincing. Everything all right? I asked. Fine, he said smoothly. Just confirming tomorrow's timing with my supplier, but I'd heard enough to know he was lying. The question was why. What didn't I know? What was happening in my own house that required phone calls about professional boundaries? The kitchen smells amazing, I said, deciding not to push. Whatever it was, it could wait until after Thanksgiving. The stock is reducing nicely. Everything's on schedule, Mrs. Brennan. You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. I nodded and retreated upstairs, but sleep didn't come easily that night. Something felt off. Not wrong, exactly. Just incomplete. Like I was missing a piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was supposed to be solving. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the kind of crisp November clarity that made everything look sharp-edged and unforgiving. I woke at 5, showered, dressed in the cream silk blouse and navy slacks I'd selected weeks ago. Every detail of my appearance had to be perfect. The guests would judge everything: my home, my family, my choices. Graham arrived at 6, his assistants in tow. Within minutes, my kitchen was chaos and order simultaneously. 3 burners going at once. Timers beeping. Knives flashing against cutting boards in rapid-fire rhythm. The assistants moved around Graham like dancers who'd rehearsed their choreography 1,000 times. By noon, guests would start arriving. By 1, we'd sit down to what I'd envisioned as the perfect meal. Trevor and Amanda arrived at 11:30, both dressed like they'd stepped out of a Brooks Brothers catalog. Trevor wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Amanda had on a cashmere dress that hugged her figure perfectly, her blonde hair styled in soft waves. Trevor kissed my cheek, smelling of expensive cologne. Happy Thanksgiving, Mom. The house looks incredible. Wait until you taste the food, I said, beaming. Graham Price is a genius. Amanda handed me a bottle of wine, the label written in French script I couldn't read. From Daddy's wine cellar. He said it pairs beautifully with turkey. How thoughtful. Tell him thank you. Trevor glanced around the living room. Where's Bridget? Not here yet, I replied, checking my phone. She'd texted that she'd be late, some issue with a potential investor for her restaurant. You know how she is. Always running behind. Trevor's expression shifted just a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. Relief? Anxiety? It vanished before I could analyze it. Well, she's missing all the pre-dinner gossip, Amanda said with a light laugh. Mrs. Chen from your book club just told me the most scandalous story about the Hendersons' divorce. What I didn't tell Trevor was that Bridget had sent 3 other texts that morning, each more urgent than the last. Mom, please call me before dinner starts. This is serious. I need to tell you something about Trevor. If you don't call, I'm coming over and telling everyone myself. I'd dismissed them as drama. Bridget could be intense, especially about Trevor. They'd always had that typical sibling rivalry. When they were younger, it was fights over toys and television channels. As adults, it had morphed into something more subtle, competitive jabs disguised as concern, territorial behavior around my attention. Lately, she'd been making cryptic comments about Trevor that I attributed to jealousy. Trevor was successful, settled, on a clear path. Bridget was still finding her way, still struggling to get her restaurant dream off the ground. Of course she resented him a little. That was natural. So I ignored her texts and focused on my guests. They came in waves, exactly as I'd planned. Amanda's parents, the Rothschilds, descended in their usual cloud of old money and barely concealed judgment. Mrs. Rothschild wore pearls that probably cost more than my car. Mr. Rothschild had that particular brand of confidence that came from never having worried about money in his entire life. Janet, darling, Mrs. Rothschild said, kissing both my cheeks. What a lovely home. So cozy. Cozy was rich person code for smaller than mine. I smiled and accepted the insult disguised as a compliment. We're so glad you could make it. Trevor's been looking forward to spending the holiday with you both. My book club friends arrived next, Patricia, Lauren, and Diane, bearing compliments about my home and thinly veiled curiosity about the professional chef I'd hired. I saw them trying to peek into the kitchen, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of Graham Price. Is it true you hired the chef from Ember? Patricia asked, her eyes wide. I've been on the waiting list for a reservation there for 6 months. Graham's an old friend, I lied smoothly. He was kind enough to make time in his schedule. The lie felt good. It elevated me, made me seem more connected than I was. Trevor's colleagues from the firm arrived with their wives, all of them performatively grateful for the invitation. The men talked about cases and billable hours. The women discussed vacation homes and private school admissions. Everyone performed their roles perfectly. By 1:00, 30 people filled my dining room, which I'd extended with additional tables to create one long, impressive spread. The table settings were perfect: bone china, crystal glasses, silver flatware polished to a mirror shine. Graham's food was presented like art. The turkey, carved tableside, looked like something from a magazine. The sides were arranged with professional precision, every detail perfect. I stood at the head of the table, wine glass in hand, surveying my kingdom. This was what I'd worked for. This moment of validation, of proving that despite my divorce, despite my age, I could still create something beautiful and enviable. A toast, I announced, and the conversations quieted. 30 faces turned toward me. To family, to friendship, and to gratitude for all our blessings. Here, someone called out. Everyone raised their glasses. Everyone except Bridget, who'd finally arrived and was standing in the doorway looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. She wore jeans and a sweater instead of the dress I'd asked her to wear. Her hair was unbrushed, falling out of its bun in messy strands. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying or hadn't slept. "Bridget, darling, you made it," I called out, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. "Come sit. You're next to your brother." "Actually, Mom, I need to, after dinner, sweetheart." "Come eat." "Chef Price has outdone himself." She stood frozen for a moment, and I could see her struggling with something. Her jaw clenched. Her hands balled into fists. But then she walked to her seat and sat down heavily, not looking at anyone. Trevor leaned over and whispered something to her. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw her flinch like he'd slapped her. I see now, looking back, how completely I dismissed her. How thoroughly I prioritized my perfect event over my daughter's clear distress. But in that moment, I was too intoxicated by my own orchestration to notice the warning signs. The meal progressed beautifully. Guests complimented every dish. The turkey was perfectly moist, the skin crackling and golden. The truffle potato torte was so good that Mrs. Rothschild, who never complimented anything, asked for the recipe. The Brussels sprouts with pancetta and balsamic reduction disappeared within minutes. The cranberry chutney with orange zest and fresh ginger was pronounced revolutionary by one of Trevor's colleagues. Amanda's mother even smiled, which was roughly equivalent to the Pope granting a papal blessing. Trevor held court at his end of the table, telling stories about his latest case that had everyone laughing. He had his father's charisma, that ability to make everyone in a room feel like they were part of something special. "So the opposing counsel brings in this expert witness," Trevor said, gesturing with his wine glass. "Claims the guy has 40 years of experience in real estate valuation. I do 10 minutes of cross-examination, and it turns out he's been suspended twice for falsifying appraisals." The lawyers at the table laughed knowingly. The others laughed because everyone else was laughing. "What happened?" someone asked. "Judge threw out his entire testimony. We won a summary judgment. Client saved $3 million in fraudulent claims." "That's my boy," I said, raising my glass toward him. He grinned at me, that confident, charming smile that made my heart swell with pride. This man I'd raised. This success I could claim partial credit for. Amanda gazed at him adoringly, her hand resting on his arm, and I allowed myself to think about their wedding. The grandchildren they'd give me. The expansion of my legacy through them. At the other end of the table, Bridget sat silent, pushing food around her plate. She'd barely eaten anything. She hadn't spoken except to give one-word answers when directly addressed. "Bridget, you're awfully quiet," Patricia said. "How are your restaurant plans coming along?" "Fine," Bridget said flatly. "She's been meeting with investors," I jumped in, trying to cover for her rudeness. It's a very exciting time, even if it's stressful. I'm sure it's difficult, Mrs. Rothschild said with false sympathy. The restaurant industry is so competitive. Most new establishments fail within the first year, don't they? Yes, Bridget said, meeting her eyes. Most do. Especially when they don't have family money to cushion the fall. The table went quiet for a moment. It was a direct shot at Amanda, at the Rothschilds, at everyone who'd never worried about failure because they had safety nets made of money. Bridget, I said sharply, sorry. But she didn't sound sorry. She sounded angry. Trevor jumped in smoothly, steering the conversation back to safe territory, and within minutes everyone had forgotten the uncomfortable moment. That was his gift. He could smooth over anything, make any awkwardness disappear. Graham served the dessert course himself, individual chocolate torts with gold leaf and raspberry coulis, presented like jewels on white plates. He moved around the table with practiced grace, placing each plate with precise care. When he reached my seat, he leaned in slightly. His voice was low enough that only I could hear. Mrs. Brennan, after dessert, I need to speak with you. Privately. Of course, I replied, assuming he wanted feedback or perhaps to discuss future events. Maybe he'd be interested in catering my Christmas party. But then Bridget stood abruptly, her chair scraped against my hardwood floors with a sound like a scream. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. 30 pairs of eyes turned to her. She stood there, trembling, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. I can't do this anymore, she said, her voice shaking but clear. Bridget, please, I began, mortified. Heat flooded my face. This isn't the time. It's never the time. Her voice rose, cracking with emotion. It's never the right moment to tell you that your perfect son, your golden boy, has been stealing from you for 7 years. The dining room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. You could have heard someone breathing 3 seats away. The silence was so total, so absolute, that it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Trevor's face drained of color, then flushed red. That's insane, he said, standing to face her. His voice had that lawyer quality, controlled, authoritative. Mom, she's lying. She's always been jealous. Jealous? Bridget laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was harsh, broken. I have bank statements, Trevor. I have transfer records. I have emails between you and your partner Craig detailing exactly how you've been siphoning money from Mom's accounts. My brain couldn't process what I was hearing. The words made sense individually, but together they formed sentences that couldn't be true. This was Thanksgiving dinner. This was my perfect family. This was... What are you talking about? I heard myself say. Your son, Bridget said, and the contempt in her voice when she said your son cut through me like a blade, has been embezzling from you since Dad's settlement came through. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. He set up accounts in your name that you don't know about, transferred funds, forged your signature on documents. This is ridiculous, Amanda interjected, standing beside Trevor. Her voice was high, defensive. Trevor would never. Trevor already has, Graham said quietly. Every head swiveled to the chef standing at the entrance to my kitchen. He held a manila folder that I hadn't noticed before. His expression was somber, apologetic, but resolved. The room erupted in murmurs. Guests shifting in their seats. Whispered questions. Mrs. Rothschild's sharp intake of breath. I'm sorry, Mrs. Brennan, Graham continued, walking toward me. His footsteps seemed impossibly loud against my floor. But when Bridget told me what she'd discovered, I couldn't stay silent. I've spent 2 days in your kitchen. I found documents hidden in the back of your pantry. Behind the fancy cookbooks you never use. He placed the folder in front of me on the table, right next to my untouched dessert. My hands shook as I opened it. The gold leaf on the chocolate torte caught the chandelier light, mocking me with its beauty. Inside were bank statements showing accounts I'd never opened. Account numbers I didn't recognize. Investment documents bearing my signature, except it wasn't quite my signature. Close, but the J in Janet was slightly different. The loop too wide, there were emails. Pages of them. Printed correspondence between Trevor and someone named Craig Matthews. The Mother Fund is performing well. Transferred another $50K this month. She hasn't noticed, we need to be more careful. Bridget's been asking questions about Mom's finances. Don't worry about Bridget. Mom thinks she's jealous and unstable. I've been laying groundwork for months. If she says anything, Mom won't believe her. Genius. How much can we pull this quarter? At least $80K. Maybe more if I can get her to sign off on the investment opportunity I mentioned. I read the words 3 times. 4 times. 5. They still didn't make sense. Or rather, they made perfect sense, and that was worse. The numbers swam before my eyes. 50,000 here. 80,000 there. 20,000. 60,000. Over 7 years, the total came to nearly $900,000. $900,000. Almost $1 million stolen from accounts I thought were safe. From my divorce settlement. From my retirement. From my future. You've been. I couldn't finish the sentence. My throat had closed up. You've been stealing from me? I looked at Trevor, my voice barely a whisper. This man I'd carried for 9 months. This boy I'd raised, sacrificed for, celebrated. This person I'd defended against every criticism, including ones from his own sister. His face had gone from red to white to gray. Amanda was staring at him in horror, taking small steps backward like she wanted to distance herself from what was unfolding. Like his guilt might be contagious. Mom, I can explain. Trevor started, but his voice had lost all its courtroom confidence. He sounded young, caught, desperate. Explain what? Bridget's voice cracked. Tears were streaming down her face, but her voice was strong. Explain how you stole almost $1 million from her? Explain how you convinced her I was the troubled one, the failure, while you were systematically robbing her blind? Explain how you were going to leave her with nothing while you bought your fancy condo in Back Bay. Trevor's jaw clenched. I saw him calculating, trying to find the angle, the argument that would save him. He'd always been able to talk his way out of trouble. Always had the right words. You don't understand, he said finally, looking around the table at the 30 witnesses to his exposure. The firm, they don't pay enough at the start. The student loans from Harvard, they're crushing. You needed? I stood so fast my chair fell backward, hitting the floor with a crash that made several guests jump. You needed my money? The money your father and I worked 30 years to secure? The money meant for my retirement, for emergencies, for both of you if you ever really needed it. My voice was rising. I couldn't control it. Years of carefully maintained composure cracking like ice. You had a job. You had opportunities. You had every advantage I could give you. And you stole from me. Mrs. Rothschild, Amanda's mother, stood, ice in her voice. She looked at Trevor like he was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. We should leave. Amanda, gather your things. Wait, Amanda said, but she was already crying, mascara running down her cheeks in black trails. Trevor, tell me this isn't true. Tell me she's making it up. The silence stretched. Trevor opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. It started small, he said finally. And the fact that he wasn't denying it made everything real in a way that turned my stomach. Just a few thousand to cover rent when I was starting out. The firm doesn't pay associates much the first few years, and I had law school debt, and I needed to maintain appearances. Bridget finished for him. You needed to look successful. Drive the right car. Wear the right suits. Date the right woman. Live in the right neighborhood. And none of that comes cheap, does it? Then it got easier, Trevor continued, and there was something almost confessional in his tone now. Like he'd been waiting to tell someone. Mom never checked those accounts. She trusted me with her financial documents. I had power of attorney for some of them. I thought I'd pay it back before anyone noticed. But you didn't pay it back, Bridget said. You took more. And more. And when I started asking questions 6 months ago, when I noticed discrepancies while helping Mom organize her files, you tried to convince her I was the problem. I remembered then Trevor's concerned phone calls over the past months. Mom, I'm worried about Bridget. She seems unstable lately. Have you thought about suggesting therapy? I don't want to alarm you, but Bridget said some strange things to me about your finances. I think her restaurant stress is making her paranoid. She's always been jealous of my success, Mom. You know that. I think it's getting worse as she gets older and hasn't achieved what she wanted. He'd poisoned me against her. Systematically, carefully, he'd laid groundwork to make sure that if she ever told me the truth, I wouldn't believe her. You turned me against my own daughter, I said, the realization dawning cold and complete. You made me doubt her so I wouldn't believe her if she told me the truth. Mom, don't. The word came out as a roar. Don't call me that. Don't you dare call me that right now. The Rothschilds were already moving toward the door, Amanda's mother practically dragging her daughter by the arm. Amanda looked back once, her face a mask of devastation and betrayal. I'm sorry, Mrs. Brennan, she said, her voice small. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Come, Amanda, her mother commanded. We need to speak with your father immediately. Other guests began gathering their coats, murmuring apologies, avoiding eye contact. Patricia grabbed her purse. Lauren whispered something to Diane. Trevor's colleagues from the firm exchanged glances, calculating glances, the kind lawyers give when they're already thinking about liability and association. Within 10 minutes, my dining room was empty except for me, Trevor, Bridget, and Graham, who stood quietly near the kitchen like a witness to an execution. The abandoned table stretched before us, covered in half-eaten food and full wine glasses. 30 place settings for ghosts. The chocolate torts were melting slowly, the gold leaf losing its shine. How long have you known? I asked Bridget. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. 6 months, she said, tears streaming down her face. I found the first discrepancy by accident. I was helping you organize your tax documents, remember? I saw a statement for an account I didn't recognize. I spent months verifying, gathering evidence, because I knew you wouldn't believe me without proof. She pulled out her phone, pulled up emails. I tried to tell you before tonight. I tried so many times. I thought about all the times she'd asked to talk. All the times I'd put her off, dismissed her concerns, told her I was too busy. Why didn't you tell me sooner? But even as I asked, I knew the answer. Because you never listened. Her voice broke. Every time I tried to talk to you about Trevor, you told me I was being dramatic or jealous. You've spent my entire life making excuses for him while holding me to impossible standards. When was I supposed to tell you? Between your criticisms of my career choices and your blind worship of your perfect son, the truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. I had done that. I'd elevated Trevor while diminishing Bridget. I'd celebrated his conventional success while questioning her artistic path. I'd trusted him implicitly while doubting her at every turn. Every parent claims they love their children equally. It's the lie we tell ourselves. But children know. They always know. And Bridget had known her entire life that I loved Trevor more, trusted him more, believed in him more. Mrs. Brennan, Graham said gently. I think you should call the police. No, I said immediately. Mom, Bridget started. Not yet. I looked at Trevor, really looked at him, and saw not my accomplished son but a stranger. A man who'd betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. You have 24 hours to return every penny you stole. I want full bank transfers, complete documentation, and a detailed accounting of where every dollar went. I don't have it all, Trevor admitted. His voice was flat, defeated. "I've spent, then you'll sell your condo. You'll liquidate your investments. You'll get a loan from your future father-in-law, assuming he doesn't destroy you first. You'll borrow from Craig Matthews. You'll do whatever it takes. And if I can't?" I stepped closer to him. Close enough to see the fear in his eyes. Close enough to smell the expensive cologne that I'd probably paid for. "Then I will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. I will make sure every law firm in this city knows what you did. I will destroy the career you stole my money to build. I will take everything from you the way you tried to take everything from me." Trevor looked at Bridget with pure hatred. His face twisted with it. "This is your fault. You couldn't leave it alone. No, Bridget said firmly, meeting his glare without flinching. "This is your fault. You stole from her. I just refuse to let you keep doing it." Trevor left without another word, slamming the door so hard that one of my picture frames fell off the wall and shattered. It was the photo of him at his law school graduation, wearing his cap and gown, smiling that confident smile, the glass scattered across my hardwood floor in 1,000 pieces. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had been holding me upright. My legs gave out, and I sat down hard on my dining room floor among the remnants of my perfect Thanksgiving. Bridget sat down beside me. Graham, after a moment's hesitation, did the same. We sat there in silence, the three of us, surrounded by abandoned plates and cooling food and the wreckage of everything I'd believed. "I'm sorry," Bridget whispered finally. "I know this destroys everything you believed about him. No, I said, my voice hollow. "It destroys everything I believed about myself. What kind of mother raises a thief? What kind of mother trusts the wrong child and doubts the right one? What kind of mother is so desperate to believe in perfection that she ignores every warning sign?" "A human one," Graham said quietly. "Parents aren't psychic, Mrs. Brennan. And children who want to deceive can be very good at it." I looked at him then, really looked at this man who'd inserted himself into my family's nightmare. "Why did you help her?" Graham glanced at Bridget, and something passed between them. Something tender and sad and complicated, because 7 years ago in Paris, Bridget was my best student. She had talent that made my teeth ache. She could have worked anywhere, done anything. But she gave up a position at Alain Ducasse's restaurant to come home and check on you because she was worried that he turned back to me. She told me her mother seemed lonely after the divorce, that her brother was acting strange, that something felt wrong. She sacrificed everything to protect you. I did that? I asked Bridget. She nodded. You kept saying everything was fine, but I could hear it in your voice. The loneliness. The uncertainty. So I came home. And I started noticing things. The way Trevor had access to all your documents. The way he'd steer conversations away from finances. The way he'd subtly criticize me whenever I asked questions. I thought you came home because you'd failed, I admitted. Shame burned through me. I thought Paris hadn't worked out. I left one of the most prestigious restaurants in the world to protect you, Bridget said, her voice breaking. And you thought I'd failed. The weight of my mistakes pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. Every assumption I'd made, every judgment I'd passed, every moment I'd chosen Trevor's word over Bridget's, all of it had been catastrophically wrong. We sat on that floor for an hour, the three of us, while my perfect Thanksgiving dinner grew cold on the table. Eventually, Graham stood and began clearing plates with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd cleaned up after disasters before. Bridget helped him, the two of them moving around me like I was a piece of furniture. I should have felt humiliated. Instead, I felt numb. My phone buzzed constantly. Texts from guests thanking me for dinner and offering carefully worded sympathy that felt more like curiosity. Messages from Amanda's mother that were thinly veiled warnings about legal action if I went public with Trevor's crimes. 3 missed calls from Richard in California because Trevor had apparently already called him with his version of events. But the text that made me finally cry came from Amanda. I can't marry him. My father is livid. He's already called his lawyers. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Brennan. I never knew. At least she'd had the spine to end it immediately. At least someone in this catastrophe had acted with integrity. What happens now? I asked Bridget as Graham washed dishes in my kitchen, the sound of running water oddly soothing. That depends on Trevor, she said. If he returns the money, you could let it go. Move forward. Try to heal. And if he doesn't? Then we prosecute him. We expose everything. And he faces consequences for what he did. I thought about Trevor in prison. About my perfect son in an orange jumpsuit. About the total destruction of everything I'd believed about my family. I want consequences, I said. Even if he returns every penny, I want him to understand what he did. What he destroyed. Bridget took my hand. Her fingers were warm, solid, real. Then we'll make sure he does. Trevor managed to scrape together $600,000 in 3 days. He sold his condo in Back Bay at a loss, desperately accepting an offer $30,000 below market value. He liquidated his investment accounts, taking early withdrawal penalties. He begged loans from associates who didn't yet know what he'd done, spinning stories about investment opportunities and family emergencies. But he couldn't find the remaining $300,000. Some of it had been spent on vacations with Amanda, trips to the Cayman Islands, weekend getaways to Napa Valley, a 10-day tour of Italy. Some went to designer suits from Brooks Brothers and custom-tailored shirts. Some disappeared into the black hole of maintaining an appearance his salary couldn't support. I'll pay the rest back over time, he pleaded over the phone on Thursday evening. Monthly installments. I'll sign anything. I'll give you collateral.no, I said simply. You return it all by Friday, or I call the police on Monday. Mom, please. I'm your son. My son wouldn't have stolen from me for 7 years. My son wouldn't have gaslighted his sister. My son wouldn't have treated my trust like a bank account he could raid whenever he felt entitled. I made a mistake. You made 17 separate transfers. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern. That's who you are. I hung up. Friday came and went. The money didn't. Monday morning, I walked into the Boston Police Department with Bridget and 3 lawyers she'd hired using money from her savings, money she'd been keeping for her restaurant but was spending to protect me instead. We filed charges. Embezzlement. Fraud. Forgery. The detective who took our statement was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed the documents Graham had found, studied the emails between Trevor and Craig Matthews. This is pretty clear-cut, she said. But I have to warn you, family financial crimes are complicated. He'll claim you gave him permission for everything. His lawyers will argue it was a misunderstanding. That's why we have his emails, Bridget's lead attorney said, placing the folder on the detective's desk. His correspondence with Craig Matthews makes it very clear this was deliberate theft, not a misunderstanding. The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, Trevor called me 17 times. I answered none of them. Richard flew in from California, furious that I was destroying our son's life over money. We met in my living room. He paced like a caged animal while I sat on the couch, watching him with detached calm. He stole from me, I told Richard. He systematically betrayed my trust for 7 years. He made a mistake. 17 mistakes. 1 for each time he transferred money without asking. This wasn't impulse. This was calculated. You're choosing money over your son. I'm choosing consequences over enabling. Something we should have done when he was younger. Richard's face turned red. This is about our divorce. You're punishing him because you're bitter about how our marriage ended. This has nothing to do with us. This is about Trevor making a choice to steal from someone who loved him. And now he gets to face what happens when choices have consequences. The press will destroy him. His career is over. You understand that? Yes. I understand perfectly. Richard left without saying goodbye. I didn't care. Our marriage had failed partly because he'd always protected Trevor from accountability while I'd overcompensated by being too hard on Bridget. We'd created this monster together through opposite extremes, and now I was dismantling him alone. The Boston Globe broke the story first. Harvard law graduate charged with embezzling from mother. The headline appeared on a Tuesday morning. By noon, every news outlet in the city had picked it up. By evening, the legal blogs were dissecting the case. Trevor's face was everywhere, handsome, privileged, smiling in his professional headshot paired with words like alleged embezzler and family betrayal. His firm fired him within hours of the charges being filed. The Massachusetts Bar Association opened an ethics investigation. Amanda's father, who turned out to be quite powerful, made sure every legal contact he had knew what Trevor had done. The trial took 8 months. I sat in that courtroom every single day, watching my son watching Trevor, because he'd lost the right to that title squirm-under testimony about his lies. Craig Matthews, offered immunity in exchange for cooperation, detailed everything. How Trevor had bragged about his mother fund. How he'd planned to keep stealing until I died, at which point he'd control everything anyway. How he'd laughed about my blind trust. "She'll never check," Craig testified that Trevor had said. "She trusts me completely. I'm her golden boy, I'd called him that. I'd created that identity for him, and he'd weaponized it against me." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts, the judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison, noting that the profound betrayal of family trust warranted the maximum sentence. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Bridget moved in with me after the trial. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. We spent months rebuilding something that had been broken long before Trevor's crimes. Our relationship, damaged by years of my favoritism and her accumulated resentment. "I'm sorry," I told her one night over dinner that she'd cooked. "I failed you in so many ways." "You did," she agreed, not sugarcoating it. "But you're trying now. That matters." Graham became an unexpected friend. He checked in regularly, sometimes stopping by with food from his restaurant, always with the excuse that he'd made too much. The chemistry between him and Bridget was obvious. The way they moved around each other in the kitchen, anticipating movements, working in harmony. Something unfinished from their Paris days. "Why didn't you two work out the first time?" I asked Bridget once. She smiled sadly. "I chose coming home over staying with him. He wanted me to stay. Build something together in Paris. But I couldn't. I felt like you needed me. Do you regret it?" "Every day. But I'd do it again." 6 months after the trial, I went to visit Trevor in prison. I hadn't seen him since the sentencing, and I needed to face him one more time. He looked smaller in his prison uniform, his Harvard confidence stripped away by institutional life. When he saw me across the visitation table, something in his expression broke. "Mom," he said, and started crying. I didn't cry. I'd done all my crying months ago. "Why?" I asked. "That's all I need to know." "Why did you do it?" "Because I could," he said after a long silence. "Because you trusted me so completely that it was easy. And then it became a game. How much could I take before you noticed?" The answer kept being more. "Did you ever love me? Or was I always just a resource to exploit?" "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "I think I convinced myself that I was entitled to it. That I'd earned it by being the perfect son. By meeting all your expectations. I never expected you to steal from me. No. But you expected perfection in everything else. And perfection is expensive to maintain." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me, and it revealed something I'd been avoiding: my role in creating him. My impossible standards, my constant pressure, my worship of achievement, all of it had contributed to a man who believed he was entitled to whatever he wanted. "I'm not going to forgive you," I told him. "Not now. Maybe not ever. I don't expect you to. But I am going to own my part in this. I pushed you. I favored you. I made you believe you were special in ways that damaged you. That doesn't excuse what I did. No. But it explains part of it. I left that prison and never went back." Trevor served 4 years before being released on parole. I didn't attend his release hearing. I didn't send money for his transition back to society. I let him rebuild his life the same way he'd forced me to rebuild mine alone. Bridget opened her restaurant 18 months after the trial. She called it Ember, using the name of Graham's restaurant with his permission. They'd officially started dating by then, and watching them together healed something in me I hadn't known was broken. The night of the opening, I sat at the best table with Graham beside me and watched my daughter command her kitchen with grace and precision. The restaurant was packed with critics and food lovers and people who'd believed in her when I hadn't. When she came out to greet the dining room, flushed with success and happiness, she stopped at my table. "What did you think?" she asked. "I think I should have supported you from the beginning," I said. "I think I wasted years not seeing your talent. I think you're remarkable, and I'm sorry it took catastrophe for me to realize it." She sat down, took my hands, and smiled. "Better late than never, Mom." 2 years later, Forbes ran an article about Bridget. Rising star chef Bridget Brennan redefines Boston dining. The piece mentioned her training in Paris, her partnership with Graham Price, the unique vision behind Ember. It also mentioned, in one brief paragraph, that she'd once given up a prestigious position to come home and protect her mother from financial exploitation by a family member. Family, she was quoted as saying, isn't about blood. It's about showing up. It's about protecting the people you love even when it costs you. Even when they don't see it at the time. That I framed that article and hung it in my hallway, right where Trevor's law school graduation photo used to be. These days, I host smaller dinners. 8 people instead of 30. Intimate instead of performative. Bridget cooks sometimes, Graham cooks sometimes, and sometimes I cook, learning from both of them. Last Thanksgiving, for years after the disaster that changed everything, we gathered in my dining room, just the 3 of us. No guests, no performance, no pretense. Just family, the real kind, the kind built on truth and forgiveness and second chances. To gratitude, I said, raising my glass. To consequences, Bridget added with a slight smile. To new beginnings, Graham finished. We drank, and in that moment, I understood something fundamental. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually need. If you've ever discovered that the people you trusted most were living lies, if you've ever had to choose between comfortable fiction and painful truth, you know that healing isn't about forgiveness. It's about accepting reality and rebuilding from honest ground. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear that families can survive even the deepest betrayals. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge with Alice for more stories about finding truth in the ruins of broken trust. Remember, loyalty means nothing without honesty. Trust without truth is just comfortable delusion. And sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to look away when everything you believed starts crumbling. Perfect families don't exist. But real ones, messy and honest and hard-won, are worth fighting for. Until next time, this is Alice reminding you that sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. And sometimes a stranger like a chef hired to cook Thanksgiving dinner can be the catalyst that reveals the truth we've been too afraid to see.